If you're brand new to Magic the Gathering and you're wondering if you should buy the Hosts of Mordor Commander deck, this review is for you. First card we always got to go over is the Commander. The Commander for this Commander deck is Sauron, Lord of the Rings. He reads, when you cast this spell, amass Orcs 5, mill 5 cards, then return a creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. He has Trample and says whenever a commander an opponent controls dies, the ring tempts you. To keep this as simple as possible, every time you cast your commander, you're going to be getting 3 creatures. That's a pretty powerful play depending on the creatures we have inside this deck. First creature we have here is the Goblin Crater Maker. You can pay 1 and sacrifice it to either deal 2 damage to a creature, or you can destroy an artifact essentially. Personally, I would take this card out of the deck. Then we have Grishnak Brash Instigator. When Grishnak Brash Instigator enters the battlefield, amass Orcs 2. So you get a token that has 2+ and +1 counters. When you do, until the end of turn, gain control of target non-legendary creature an opponent controls with power less than or equal to the amassed army's power. Untap that creature, it gains haste until the end of turn. I'm not too sure how much creature stealing there is inside this deck and how much you're going to be able to amass that orc, because in order for this card to take a decent creature, you're going to have a pretty large orc on the battlefield. So this card is good depending on the situation and what you're taking. You generally, when we play these strategies, you're stealing your opponent's creatures and then attacking with them and then sacrificing them so your opponent can't get those creatures back. The next creature we have here is Gutter Snipe. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. This is a card that ends games depending on your ability to cast instant or sorcery spells. I don't see that there are too many. I mean, there are 22 instant or sorcery spells inside this deck, which is a lot. It can win games, but I would probably take this card out of the deck. We have a Merciless Executioner. I mean, for 3 mana, everybody sacrifices a creature. I always play cards like this in my commander decks. Keep this card in the deck, it's good. Moria Scavenger. Death Touch Haste, you can tap it to discard a card and then draw a card. If the discarded card was a creature card, you amass Orcs 1. It's a 1/4, so this thing is actually a pretty decent blocker and it has Death Touch, so people aren't going to be attacking into you, and on that same turn you play it, you can tap them to draw a card essentially and put a token onto the battlefield. This is a pretty decent card right here. Orcish Siege Master. Trample, other orcs and goblins you control have trample. Whenever Orcish Siege Master attacks, it gets +X/+0 until the end of turn, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Inside this deck, it's pretty decent when your commander has 9 power. So the Siege Master technically could be attacking for 9 trample damage. We have the Treasure Nabber, which essentially just whenever an opponent taps an artifact for mana, you get to just take it until the end of your next turn, which is a pretty good card. I'm happy to see this got reprinted. Then we have Anger. Anger gives creatures you control haste on the battlefield as long as Anger is in your graveyard. Anger is a staple in so many red commander decks. Keep this card inside the deck, it's a good card. Corsairs of Umbar. You can pay 3 mana. Target goblin, orc, or pirate can't be blocked this turn. Okay. Whenever Corsair of Umbar deals combat damage to a player, amass Orcs 3. I like this card, that's pretty good. Grima, Saruman's Footman. Grima can't be blocked. Whenever Grima deals combat damage to a player, that player exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then that player puts the exiled cards that weren't cast this way on the bottom of the library in a random order. And this card would go really well in Tasha. And that's all I really think about that card. I'm not too sure if I would want to play that card in this deck, but it goes well with Tasha. We have a Hostage Taker. This is just a decent Dimir card. Whenever Hostage Taker enters the battlefield, exile another target creature or artifact until Hostage Taker leaves the battlefield. And then you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled with Hostage Taker. It's just a good card that you would just play. Notion Thief. This card is kind of mean, guys. Flash, if an opponent would draw a card, except the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. So you're essentially stealing cards when your opponent's supposed to be drawing cards. It's a good card, and that's nice art, it's new art. Saruman the White Hand. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, amass Orcs 5, where X is that spell's mana value. Goblins and Orcs you control have Ward 2. Yeah, well, now I know why the Gutter Snipe inside the commander deck. This Saruman's a pretty decent card. I mean, I would probably take Saruman and build a commander deck just outside of that, just with this card. It's pretty decent. We have Shelob Dread Weaver. This is cool. Whenever a non-token creature opponent controls dies, exile it. Alright. You can pay 3 mana to put a creature card exiled with Shelob Dreadweaver into its owner's graveyard. Put 2 +1/+1 counters on Shelob and then draw a card. And then you can pay any amount of mana and 1 and a black to put target creature card with mana value X exiled with Shelob onto the battlefield tapped under your own control. So 3 to buff Shelob and then any amount of mana to put a creature onto your own battlefield. This is cool. It's different. I like that card. We have Goblin Dark Dwellers. Whenever Goblin Dark Dwellers enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant or sorcery spell with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put in your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. I would probably take this card out of the deck. Lord of the Nazgul, Wraith Noble, awesome. Flying. Wraiths you control have protection from ring bearers. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, create a 3/3 black wraith creature token with menace. If you control 9 or more wraiths you control have base power and toughness 9/9 until the end of turn. I mean, this is another card that's talking about casting instant or sorcery spells. The way this deck is being built right now, I would probably take Saruman and put Saruman as the commander of this deck and just put Sauron inside the deck. A lot of the stuff inside this deck is based on casting instant or sorcery spells and getting something, and I would just play Saruman as the commander of this deck if I bought it. Monstrosity of the Lake. When Monstrosity of the Lake enters the battlefield, you may pay 5. If you do, tap all creatures your opponents control, then put a stun counter on each of those creatures. For 10 mana, you can do all of that? I don't know. That seems like a lot. Siege Gang Commander. Yeah, you create 3 goblins when it enters the battlefield, and you can sack goblins to deal damage to things. The Mouth of Sauron. Another legendary creature. When the Mouth of Sauron enters the battlefield, target player mills 3 cards, then amass Oryx X, where X is the number of instant or sorcery cards in that player's graveyard. Like I said, just make Saruman the commander of this deck because everything has to do with instant or sorcery cards here. Inferno Titan, when it enters the battlefield, you do 3 damage to whatever you want, basically. I mean, when you're reanimating things with Sauron, it seems like a pretty good card, but this deck cares more about instant or sorcery spells, so I would probably take this card out of the deck. Scourge of the Throne. Flying Dethrone. Whenever Scourge of the Throne attacks for the first time each turn, if it's attacking the player with the most life or tied for the most life, untap all attacking creatures. After this phase, then there's an additional combat phase. I mean, this is a good card to have inside the deck. I wouldn't be mad about owning this card. Troll of Khazad Doom. Troll of Khazad Doom can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. So it's an unblockable 6 mana, 6/5. Take this card out of the deck. You're just gonna end up paying 1 mana to discard this for a swamp and then just reanimate it if it's the only thing you can reanimate with Sauron. Voracious Fellbeast. Flying. When Voracious Fellbeast enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a creature. You create a food token for each creature sacrificed this way. This is awesome. I kind of like this card. I mean, it is 6 mana. It's another Merciless Executioner. It's a pretty decent card. I like it. Nullspine Dragon. When this enters the battlefield, you may discard your entire hand and then draw cards equal to the damage dealt to target opponent this turn. Nullspine Dragon's kind of like a win more card, so it's a decent card though. I wouldn't be mad at owning this card. Rampaging War Mammoth. Trample. You can cycle this card, and then whenever you cycle this card, you can destroy up to X target artifacts. A 9/7 with Trample. I kind of like this card, guys. I think this one's pretty decent. That's kind of interesting, actually. Because I would, honestly, with Sauron, if you build a cycle deck with Sauron and then are able to reanimate the creatures that are big with cycling, I think that's how I'm going to build this deck. It seems kind of like good value for discarding things, drawing cards, casting your commander, getting those things back, and just kind of doing this over and over again. Seems kind of fun. We have the Balrog of Moria. Trample Haste. When the Balrog of Moria dies, you may exile it. When you do, for each opponent, exile up to 1 target creature that player controls. Oh, wow. It does have cycling, like we were talking about earlier. When you cycle Balrog of Moria, create 2 treasure tokens. Yeah, I mean, if you're going with Sauron as your commander, I would definitely keep this card inside the deck. I just think that there's so many instant or sorcery type spells inside this deck that you're gonna want to make Saruman the commander of this deck, guys. Out of the box, I mean. This is a Saruman deck, not Sauron. We have a Cavern Horde Dragon. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. Flying Trample Haste. Nice. Whenever Cavern Horde Dragon deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. Cards like this are always good. It does cost 9 mana, and depending on the opponents you're playing against, it'll be a lot cheaper, and you can attack and get that mana right away. This is definitely a good reanimation target with Sauron. If you're going to play Sauron as commander, keep this card inside the deck. This is just a fantastic card. This card will win you games. Now we have the instant and sorcery, so we're just going to skim through these rather quickly to save time. We have a Consider. You're going to draw a card. Instant speed. It's going to trigger your Saruman. If you're playing Saruman as the commander, it's good. Faithless Looting, another 1 mana spell that's going to trigger Saruman. Reanimate. Guys, this is a good card. Wow. Guys, wow, that's a decent card. Nice. Reanimate. 1 mana, put a creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield. Fantastic card. Wow, this is a good deck. Arcane Denial, you can counter a spell. We have Feed the Swarm, destroy an enchantment. Summons of Saruman. I've never seen this before. Amass Orcs X, mill X cards. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value X or less from among them without paying their mana cost. That's what I'm saying, guys. This is, and it has flashbacks, so you can do this again. This is a Saruman commander deck. That's it. Thrill of Possibility. Okay, you can draw cards. Forbidden Alchemy. This has flashbacks, so you can be able to draw cards twice. We have Treason of Isengard. Put up to 1 instant or sorcery card from graveyard on top of your library. Amass Orcs. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Bitter Downfall. You can destroy target creature. Its controller loses 2 life. Deep Analysis, another card with flashback. Factor Fiction, cool. Languish, cool. Lidless Gaze. Exile the top card of each player's library until the end of your next turn. You may cast those cards, and mana of any type can be spent to cast them, and this has flashback. Cool. I mean, that's what I'm saying. This deck is really good at casting instant or sorcery spells and caring about instant or sorcery spells, so make Saruman the commander. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that. Extract from Darkness. Each player mills 2 cards, and you put a creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Fantastic. That's fun. Now we have a Living Death. This is a good card right here. Each player exiles all cards from the graveyard and then sacrifice all creatures they control, then put all cards they exiled this way onto the battlefield. So because you're milling a lot, you should have a lot of creatures in your graveyard, and then you're just gonna be like, all right, well, I'm gonna take all these creatures, and now they're in play. This card wins games. It's good. Boon of the Wish Giver. You can draw 4 cards. You can also cycle this. I would take this card out of the deck, but I ain't upset about drawing 4 cards either, though. We got Wake the Dragon. Create a 6/6 dragon with flying, menace, and whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, gain control of target artifact that player controls. Oh, I like that. And it has flashbacks, so you can cast this again. Oh, this is going into my Hello Commander deck. This is a good card. Subjugate the Hobbits. Gain control of each non-commander creature with mana value 3 or less. So it's just a one-sided board wipe type, stealing everything type of card. If your opponent's playing small creatures, it's a good card in that situation. I would take this out because it's really specific. Too greedily, too deep. Pause. Put target creature from a graveyard on the battlefield under your control. That creature deals damage to its power equal to each other creature. So it's like a board wipe reanimation spell. I like that card. That's a pretty decent card. Decree of Pain, cool. Cycling, destroy all creatures, they can't be regenerated. Draw a card for each creature destroyed this way. Good card to have in your collection. Blasphemous Act, the board wipes in this deck are really good, guys. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each creature on the battlefield. It deals 13 damage to each creature. Yeah, fantastic, really good. I like the fact that there's good board wipes inside this deck, and our commander is going to be reanimating creatures, so we don't really necessarily care that we're destroying all the creatures, because when we cast our commander again, we just get our creatures back. I will say though, our commander costs 8 mana, so we want to do this sparingly. You're not going to go into the game expecting yourself to cast Sauron over and over and over again. First artifact we have here is Everflowing Chalice. It's a decent card. 2 mana, put 1 mana onto the battlefield. Soul Ring, yeah. Arcane Signet, fantastic. Mind Stone, cool. Basalt Monolith. Guys, look, this costs 2 mana to put into the battlefield. 1 mana, 2 mana, 2 mana. These are good mana rocks. Basalt Monolith, this card goes infinite and can generate infinite mana depending on the deck you're playing. Commander Sphere, they put this in all the precons. Worn Power Stone, 3 mana to tap for 2. The Relic of Sauron, tap to add 2 mana in any combination of Grixis. You can pay 3 mana and tap to draw 2 cards and then discard a card. Yeah, it's a cool card. I mean, it's gonna help you to put creatures in the graveyard if you want to reanimate them with Sauron. It's a good card, does what the deck wants to do. Fiery Inscription. When Fiery Inscription enters the battlefield, the ring tempts you. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Fiery Inscription deals 2 damage to each opponent. Okay, like I said, make Sauron the commander. I don't know how many times I have to say that. Shiny Impetus. You can goad an opponent's creature, or in other words, force your opponent's creatures to attack your opponents. We have Revenge of Ravens. Seems odd. Whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, that player's controller loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Okay, I would take this out. In the Darkness, Bind Them. Create a 3/3 Black Wraith creature token with Menace. The ring tempts you. For 3 turns in a row that happens. And then for each opponent, gain control of up to 1 target creature that player controls until the end of turn. Untap those creatures, they gain haste until the end of turn. The ring tempts you. Yeah, I mean, that's a card, and it does something. I mean, you're going to be able to put creature tokens onto the battlefield. Personally, I would just take this card out of the deck. It's just what I would do. There's not enough stealing and sacrificing for me to think that this card's going to be that good for that ultimate ability. And for 5 mana, I could just do something else. We have good dual lands in the lands I see over here. We can use the Desolate Lighthouse to pay 3 mana to draw a card and discard a card because we want to be discarding cards for our commander. And Dragon Skull Summit is pretty nice. I also think I saw a Rogue's Passage over here. We're just going to make a creature you control unblockable, and when your commander has 9 power, 3 hits will knock someone out of the game. Rogue's Passage is a game-winning card over here, and it just looks like there's a bunch of decent lands over here. The mana basis for all these decks. Oh, what is this? The Black Gate? As the Black Gate enters the battlefield, you may pay 3 life. If you don't, it enters the battlefield tapped. Okay, you can tap it to add black, or you can pay 2 and tap it to choose a player with the most life or tie for the most life. Target creature can't be blocked by creatures that player controls this turn. Okay, it's another Rogue's Passage, guys. That's pretty cool. I mean, Rogue's Passage for a specific player, but it's still an awesome card. Nice, man. Yeah, if I look at this, I would have to give this commander deck a 8 out of 10. I think that this commander deck is gonna play really well out of the box if you take Saruman and make Saruman the commander of this deck, because everything is just so focused on instant and sorcery spells. For a new player, when you look at this deck and you buy it and you're playing it for the first time, if you want to keep Sauron as the commander, I would suggest just kind of forgetting that he's your commander and just playing the deck, playing your cards inside your hand, casting the instant or sorcery spells that we have a bunch of over here that are actually pretty decent. And then when the opportunity arises, like if you get Saruman on the battlefield, you can then use Sauron to put Saruman back onto the battlefield if somebody destroys your Saruman. I think that Sauron just kind of acts like a big play card. You don't necessarily want to revolve the entire deck around casting Sauron because he does cost 8 mana, which tends to be quite unreliable. And the fact that we only have 8 artifacts or a mana ramp over here, we're not really going to have too much mana to be doing that in the first place. Or you can avoid all of that by just making Saruman the commander of the deck. And then I think the deck will flow much easier and will play much more consistently because everything revolves around this creature's ability. And that's going to be that for the review, guys. If you like this video, you can like this video. And if you're a player that's brand new to Magic the Gathering and you want to get better at the game, you can subscribe to the channel because all the content here is designed to make you better at Magic the Gathering. Keep in mind that we're doing a review for all of the other Lord of the Rings commander decks, and if you want to watch those videos, you can click the link up here. Whenever I end these videos, I always say the same thing. Always remember, eat healthy, okay? Work out every single day, even if it's just for 5 minutes. And most importantly, you gotta remember to believe in yourself, alright? Peace out, people.